Jack had always admired his wife, Lisa, for her talent. She was a remarkable dancer, the kind of woman who could steal the show with her graceful moves and radiant confidence. From the moment they met, Jack had been entranced by her. They married quickly, swept up in the romance of it all. Life was good, until the day it wasn't. 10 years into their marriage, Jack had found a rhythm in their life together. They had 2 beautiful children, a cozy home, and their careers were on track. Lisa was still dancing, though more for personal enjoyment than professionally. She taught classes at a local studio, still captivating those who watched her. Jack, a graphic designer, worked from home, content in his world where things seemed steady and predictable. One afternoon, while Jack was cleaning out the attic, he stumbled upon an old box of Lisa's memorabilia, costumes, photos, and clippings from her dancing days. As he sifted through them, his eyes landed on a stack of photographs he hadn't seen before. They were from years ago, photos of lavish parties, extravagant, celebrity-filled gatherings that seemed almost surreal. Jack was no stranger to Lisa's social life before they were married. She'd always told him about the high-profile events she had attended, but he hadn't given it much thought. One name kept popping up, though, P. Diddy. Jack knew Lisa had attended a few of his infamous parties back in the day, but as he looked closer at these photos, something gnawed at him. She was in almost all of them, dancing, laughing, and always next to the same man. He didn't recognize the man at first, but after some online searching, Jack realized who he was, a music producer who had been close to Diddy's circle for years. His chest tightened as a suspicion began to form, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. He tried to push it out of his mind, convincing himself it was just old photos, meaningless memories of a wilder time. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The turning point came when an old acquaintance of Lisa's, someone from her dancing days, reached out to Jack via social media. The message was cryptic: "It's crazy how we never talked about what happened at those Diddy parties. You're a strong guy for staying with her." Confused and angered, Jack pressed for details, but the acquaintance seemed to regret sending the message, quickly backtracking and refusing to explain. The doubt was no longer avoidable. Jack decided to confront Lisa. That evening, as they sat at the dinner table, he couldn't hold it in any longer. "Lisa," he began, his voice tense, "do you remember those parties you used to go to? The ones at P. Diddy's house?" Lisa looked up from her plate, her expression calm but guarded. "Of course. That was a long time ago, though." "Why?" Jack swallowed hard. "I found some photos today. And someone from your past reached out to me. They implied something. Something about you and someone else." Lisa's face paled, her fork clattering onto her plate. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaky. "You know what I'm talking about," Jack pressed. "Did something happen at those parties? Was there someone else?" Lisa's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't immediately respond. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think it would ever come out," she admitted, her words heavy with guilt. "It was a mistake, Jack. I was young, caught up in that world. It didn't mean anything, I swear." Jack's heart sank as the reality of it hit him. His wife, the woman he had loved for so long, had been unfaithful. And not just once, he could see it in her eyes, in the way her confession came too easily. It wasn't just one night of poor judgment. It was more. "How long?" Jack asked, his voice hollow. "A few months," Lisa whispered. "It was at the height of my dancing career. I was caught up in everything: fame, the excitement of being around celebrities, and the attention. I'm so sorry, Jack. I never wanted to hurt you." Jack stared at her, his mind racing. 10 years of marriage, and only now was he learning the truth. He thought about the life they had built, the memories they had shared, and the future he had imagined with her. But now, it all seemed tainted. "I trusted you," he said, his voice breaking. "I trusted you with everything. Lisa reached across the table, her hand trembling. "Please, Jack. It was a long time ago. I've changed. We've built a life together, and I love you. I've always loved you." But Jack couldn't respond. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. He got up from the table and walked out of the house, needing time to think, to breathe, to figure out how to move forward. As he drove aimlessly through the city that night, Jack realized that trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to repair. And though he wasn't sure what would come next, he knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. A few weeks had passed since Lisa's confession, and though life went on, the weight of her betrayal loomed over everything. Jack tried to focus on his work, tried to be a present father to their kids, but the doubts gnawed at him. The image of Lisa's tearful apology couldn't erase the images that plagued his mind, of her dancing, laughing, and losing herself in the glamorous, reckless world he'd never been a part of. One evening, while going through more of Lisa's old things, Jack stumbled across an old flash drive tucked away in a drawer. At first, he didn't think much of it, just another relic from the past. But something about it caught his attention. It was unmarked, no label, no indication of what might be inside. A nagging feeling told him to plug it in. Jack sat down at his computer, inserted the drive, and waited for it to load. The folder that appeared was labeled Diddy Parties, and his stomach immediately twisted into knots. He hesitated, hovering over the folder, wondering if he should just shut the computer down and walk away. But the curiosity, the need to know, was stronger. With a click, the folder opened, revealing dozens of video files. Each one dated, stretching across the year when Lisa had been at the height of her dancing career. Jack's hand shook as he clicked on the first video. The screen flickered to life with footage of a lavish party. The camera panned over opulent decor, a massive mansion, and crowds of people dancing to loud music. The guests were clearly having a good time, perhaps too good. As the camera moved through the room, Jack's breath caught in his throat. There, in the middle of the dance floor, was Lisa. She was radiant, moving to the rhythm, drawing attention from everyone around her. At first, it seemed innocent enough, just a young woman enjoying herself at a party. But as the video continued, things took a darker turn. The camera followed Lisa as she moved deeper into the house, where the atmosphere shifted. The music faded, replaced by quieter conversations, whispers, and laughter. The camera zoomed in on a secluded area, where small groups of people were huddled together, clearly indulging in something far more sinister. Prohibited substances. Jack's heart pounded as he watched Lisa laughing with a group of men, one of them handing her a small bag of powder. She took it, hesitated for a moment, the camera lingering on her glazed expression afterward. His mind reeled, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Lisa had never mentioned anything about drugs, had never hinted at being involved in that kind of scene. But there she was, right in the middle of it all. He clicked on another video. This time, the footage showed a private room, dimly lit and filled with couches. The people inside were more than just partying, they were crossing boundaries, engaging in things Jack could hardly believe. Men and women together, touching, kissing, a blur of movement. And in the center of it all, Lisa. Jack felt sick. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. His wife, the woman he had loved and trusted, was there, entangled with multiple men, laughing and indulging in things that made his stomach churn. He recognized some of the faces, people from the music industry, celebrities he'd only seen on TV. But Lisa wasn't just in the background. She was participating, fully immersed in whatever twisted game they were playing. Each new video he clicked was worse than the last. Lisa, high, dancing provocatively, disappearing with different men into private rooms. The more Jack watched, the more he realized how deeply she had been involved. It wasn't just a brief fling or a poor decision made in the heat of the moment. This had been a lifestyle, a part of her that she had hidden from him for years. The final video was the worst. It showed a more private, intimate setting, an upstairs bedroom in one of the mansions. The camera was shakier, as though whoever filmed it was trying to be discreet. Lisa was in the frame, half-clothed, with a man Jack didn't recognize. The room was filled with laughter and moaning, and Jack's chest tightened as the realization hit him. She had cheated on him not just in a moment of weakness, but repeatedly, recklessly, without any thought of him or their future. He slammed the laptop shut, breathing heavily, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The reality of it was too much to handle. The lies, the deceit, the things she had done while he thought they were building a life together, how could he ever look at her the same way? Jack sat in silence for what felt like hours, staring at the blank screen, trying to piece together what to do next. His mind was flooded with questions. How had she kept this hidden for so long? How had he never suspected? And now, knowing all of this, what would he do? Lisa had said it was a mistake, a brief moment of weakness, but this was no mistake. This was a side of her that Jack had never known existed, a side that had thrived in darkness and deception. And now, he was left with the wreckage. When he finally stood up, Jack felt hollow, drained. He knew there was no going back, no pretending that everything would be okay. The life they had built together, the trust they had once shared, it had all been shattered by the reality of those videos. With one last glance at the computer, Jack made a decision. He had to confront her. There was no more room for excuses or lies. And whatever happened next, he knew that nothing between them would ever be the same again. When Jack finally confronted Lisa, he felt a strange calmness overtake him, though his inside still churned with anger and betrayal. He waited until the kids were asleep, the house silent, before he sat her down in the living room. Lisa looked at him, sensing that something serious was coming, her expression wary. "I found the flash drive," Jack said, his voice steady but cold. He saw her eyes widen, fear flashing across her face. "The videos from those parties. I saw everything." Lisa's face drained of color, and she looked like she might faint. Her lips trembled as she tried to form words, but nothing came out at first. She opened her mouth, closed it, then buried her face in her hands. Silent sobs racked her body as Jack sat across from her, watching, waiting for an explanation, if one even mattered anymore. After what felt like an eternity, Lisa finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Jack," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I never wanted you to know. I've been living with this for so long. I've been angry with myself, hating myself for what I did." Jack remained silent, his gaze fixed on her, but inside, the storm of emotions he had been holding back threatened to break. He wanted to shout, to demand why she'd done it, why she'd hidden it, but something in her brokenness made him hold back. Lisa continued, her voice trembling. "I wasn't the person you know back then. I was lost, Jack. I got caught up in that world, the fame, prohibited substances, the men. It was exciting at first, but it quickly turned into something dark. Something I couldn't control." She paused, wiping away tears. "I hated myself for it, even while I was doing it. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. The parties, the attention, it filled this void inside me, but it was toxic. I was toxic." Jack's throat tightened. He had questions, so many questions, but hearing her admit her own guilt and self-loathing complicated everything. It wasn't as black and white as he had thought. "I've been angry with myself for years, Jack," she continued, her voice barely audible. "Even after we got married, the shame never went away. I've had nightmares about it, about those nights, about what I did. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, sick to my stomach, remembering the things I had done. And then I'd look at you and feel even worse because you had no idea who I really was." Jack clenched his fists, the anger bubbling back to the surface. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice sharp. "You had 10 years to come clean, Lisa. 10 years." "I was terrified," she admitted, tears streaming down her face again. "I thought I could bury it, that if I just moved on, it would go away. But it never did. It haunts me every day. I've thought about going to a psychologist so many times, just to try and forget, to erase those memories, that part of my life, like it was a nightmare. But I was too scared to face it. Jack stared at her, his mind spinning. So you just decided to lie to me? To pretend everything was fine? I didn't know how to tell you, she said, her voice shaking. How do you tell the person you love that you've done horrible things? That you've betrayed them? I knew I would lose you, Jack, and that terrified me. But it wasn't just about keeping the truth from you, it was about keeping it from myself. I wanted to pretend that part of me didn't exist. Her words hit Jack hard, the weight of them sinking in. He could see the pain she was in, the torment she had carried with her all these years. It didn't excuse what she had done, but it gave him a glimpse into the chaos that had consumed her. You've been living with this, alone, Jack said slowly, the realization dawning on him. Lisa nodded. I thought I could bury it, but it's always been there, lurking in the background. Even now, I dream about it. It's like a shadow that follows me everywhere. I've tried to push it away, to forget, but I can't. Jack let out a long breath, running his hands through his hair. Do you even know how much this changes everything? He asked, his voice raw. I don't even know who you are anymore. I don't either, she whispered, her voice full of anguish. But I want to be better. I need help, Jack. I can't live like this anymore, hating myself, hiding from the past. I need to fix it. I need to fix me. For the first time, Jack saw a flicker of something in her, genuine remorse, the desire to heal. But it was too much for him to process all at once. The woman sitting in front of him was both his wife and a stranger, someone he had loved and someone who had betrayed him in the worst way possible. I don't know what to do, Jack admitted, his voice breaking. I don't know if I can move past this. I don't expect you to forgive me, Lisa said quietly. I just need you to know that I've been punishing myself for this for years. I've been living in my own personal hell, even if you didn't see it. And I'll go to a psychologist. I'll get help. I want to face this, for real this time. Jack stood up, his heart heavy. I need time, he said, his voice rough. I need to think. Lisa nodded, her face streaked with tears, but she didn't argue. She knew he needed space. As Jack left the room, he felt the weight of everything crushing down on him. He wasn't sure where they would go from here, or if they could ever go back to the way things were. All he knew was that everything had changed, and the road ahead was going to be harder than either of them had ever imagined. Jack sat in the dimly lit kitchen, his mind swirling with everything Lisa had told him. The weight of it was crushing, her betrayal, her guilt, the years she had spent silently punishing herself. At first, all he could feel was anger. Anger that she had lied to him, hidden such a huge part of herself, anger at the life they had built on what now felt like shaky ground. But as the hours passed and the house remained quiet, something else crept in, something he hadn't expected. He began to feel sorry for her. He thought about the woman he had seen over the last decade. She had been loving, caring, and devoted to their family. But now, seeing her broken in front of him, he realized she had been carrying a heavy burden this whole time, one she had been too scared to share. The more he thought about it, the more his heart ached, not just for himself, but for Lisa. She had been trapped in her own guilt, ashamed of who she had been and too terrified to face it. She had tried to move on, but the memories had haunted her. The nightmares, the self-loathing, the fear of losing him, she had lived with all of that while pretending to be fine. Jack realized that, in her own way, she had been suffering just as much as he had been these past few weeks. Eventually, he got up and walked back into the living room. Lisa was still there, sitting on the couch, her knees pulled up to her chest. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked so small, so fragile. Jack stood there for a moment, staring at her. His heart softened in a way he hadn't expected. He thought of all the time she had supported him, all the moments they had shared as a family. The love they had once felt for each other was still there, buried beneath the hurt. And now, more than anything, Jack realized she needed him. Not to judge her, not to punish her, but to help her heal. Without saying a word, Jack walked over to the couch and sat down beside her. Lisa didn't move at first, still curled up in her own sorrow. He hesitated, unsure if she would even want him near her, but then something inside him gave way. Slowly, he reached out and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. Lisa froze for a moment, shocked by the gesture, but then she melted into his embrace, her body shaking with sobs. Jack held her tighter, his own eyes stinging with tears he hadn't expected to come. He hadn't cried in years, but now, as he held his broken wife, everything came rushing out, the pain, the confusion, the sorrow. "I'm so sorry," Lisa whispered through her tears. "I never meant to hurt you. I hate what I did. I hate who I was." Jack squeezed her tighter, feeling her pain as if it were his own. "I know," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I know you didn't. And I hate that you've been carrying this alone for so long." For the first time in days, Jack let his walls down. He wasn't just angry anymore. He was heartbroken, for both of them. As much as he had been hurt, he now understood the weight of what Lisa had been through, how deeply she regretted her actions. And as the tears flowed from both of them, he realized that this wasn't just about betrayal, it was about healing, too. "I'm sorry, too," Jack murmured, his voice cracking. "For not seeing what you were going through. For not realizing how much pain you were in." Lisa pulled back slightly, her tear-filled eyes meeting his. "I didn't want you to know. I was so ashamed." Jack brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers trembling. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," he said softly. "I don't know how we're going to get through this, but I don't want you to do it by yourself. If you want to see a psychologist, I'll go with you. We can do this together, if you want." Lisa's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected that, hadn't expected him to still want to stand by her after everything. "You do that?" she asked, her voice fragile. Jack nodded, tears still slipping down his cheeks. "Yeah. I would. We've been through a lot, and I don't know how we fix this, but I know I don't want to lose you. I don't want this to be the end of us." For the first time in what felt like ages, a small glimmer of hope flickered in Lisa's eyes. She reached up and gently wiped a tear from Jack's face. "I want to fix this too," she whispered. "I don't want to lose you either." They sat there for a long time, holding each other, the weight of the past still heavy but somehow a little lighter now that they had shared it. Jack knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still wounds that would take time to heal, and trust that needed to be rebuilt. But in that moment, holding his wife in his arms, he realized that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way through it together. "I'll call someone tomorrow," Lisa said softly, her head resting against his chest. "We can talk to someone. I don't want to live in this nightmare anymore." Jack kissed the top of her head, feeling the warmth of her body against his. "We'll get through it," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Together." For the first time in weeks, Jack felt a small sense of peace. There was still so much to process, so much pain left to confront, but for now, they had each other. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start healing. In the months that followed, Jack and Lisa embarked on a journey neither of them had expected, but one that would change them both forever. They attended counseling together, sitting in quiet rooms where difficult truths were spoken, unflinching honesty met with deep vulnerability. At first, it was hard. There were moments when Jack couldn't look at Lisa without feeling the weight of her betrayal. And Lisa, for all her remorse, struggled with guilt so deep it seemed to suffocate her at times. The psychologist helped them navigate the tangled emotions they each carried. Jack's pain, his anger, and confusion were met with understanding. He was given space to grieve the loss of the marriage he thought he had. Lisa, in turn, was encouraged to confront her past head-on. She learned how to forgive herself, a process that was perhaps the hardest part of all. Slowly, she began to understand that her past, while ugly and filled with regret, did not have to define her future. There were setbacks, of course. Days when Jack felt overwhelmed by what he had seen on the flash drive, nights when Lisa woke up trembling from nightmares of those dark, reckless days. But through it all, they kept showing up for each other, even when it was hard. They kept going to therapy, kept having the difficult conversations, kept holding on to the belief that something better could grow from the wreckage. One day, several months into their healing journey, Jack realized that the anger he once felt had started to soften. It wasn't that he had forgotten what happened, but he was no longer consumed by it. The past was still there, but it no longer held the same power over him. In its place, a quiet understanding had begun to take root. He understood the depths of Lisa's pain, how lost she had been back then, and how hard she was working now to make amends, not just to him but to herself. Lisa, too, began to feel lighter. As she worked through her guilt, she started to see herself not just as the woman who had made terrible mistakes, but as someone capable of growth and redemption. She wasn't the same person she had been at those parties, and with Jack's support, she began to forgive herself for the choices she had made in that dark chapter of her life. One evening, as they sat together in the backyard, watching their kids play in the fading sunlight, Jack reached over and took Lisa's hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a world of meaning. He didn't need to say anything, and neither did she. They both knew how far they had come. "We've made it through a lot," Jack said quietly, looking over at her. Lisa smiled softly, her fingers lacing through his. "We have." "Do you think we'll be okay?" he asked, the question hanging between them like a delicate thread. Lisa looked at him, her eyes filled with both sadness and hope. "I think we already are," she said, her voice steady. "We're not perfect, Jack. We've been through hell, but we came out on the other side. I think we'll be okay because we're still here. We're still trying." Jack nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep inside him. They had been through the worst, but they hadn't given up on each other. And that, more than anything, gave him hope. As the months turned into years, Jack and Lisa rebuilt their marriage, brick by brick, day by day. It wasn't always easy, and the scars of their past never fully disappeared. But they learned that healing was a process, not a destination. They grew closer in ways they never had before, learning to communicate with more honesty and empathy than they ever thought possible. Lisa found peace through therapy and gradually let go of the shame that had haunted her for so long. Jack, too, found forgiveness, not just for Lisa, but for himself. He forgave himself for not seeing her pain sooner, for not understanding the depth of her inner turmoil. Together, they created a new foundation, stronger than the one that had been shattered. Their love, though bruised and changed, endured. It wasn't the same love they had in the beginning, it was something deeper, something forged in the fire of their shared struggle. Years later, as they watched their children grow, Jack and Lisa would reflect on their journey with a quiet sense of pride. They had faced the unimaginable and had come out stronger, not because they had erased the past, but because they had confronted it, owned it, and grown from it. And in the end, that was what saved them, not perfection, not forgetting, but the willingness to keep going, to keep trying, and to keep loving through it all.